Some artists burn so brightly that the fall, when it comes, is almost impossible to look away from. Fame is not a promise. It is a window, and for these acts, that window slammed shut. These are 10 fading bands that simply haven't aged well. If music history like this is your thing, tap that notification bell so you never miss another deep dive from this channel. Number 10. Milli Vanilli. Their debut album spent 8 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard 200, and the singles Blame It on the Rain, Girl I'm Gonna Miss You, and Baby Don't Forget My Number all reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. In February of 1990, Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan accepted the Grammy Award for Best New Artist, becoming one of the biggest pop acts on the planet. The problem was that the group featured models Fab Morvan and Rob Pilatus, who performed to tracks sung by professional vocalists. It was Frank Farian, sick of Rob and Fab's demands to actually do their own singing on the next album, who decided it was time to pull the plug and reveal that Milli Vanilli weren't who they appeared to be. On November 19, 1990, the Recording Academy revoked Milli Vanilli's Grammy, the only time the Best New Artist award has ever been rescinded in Grammy history. Pilatus died of an accidental overdose of alcohol and prescription pills on April 3, 1998, while in Germany working on a planned Milli Vanilli comeback album. The Milli Vanilli story remains the most spectacular fraud in pop music history.
And this is true. Girl, you know it's true.
Number 9. Starship.
We can build this dream together, standing strong.
In 1985, the band known as Starship made music history. Apart from the Rolling Stones, they became the only other act to ever have top 5 singles in 3 different decades: the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, counting the Jefferson Airplane, Jefferson Starship, Starship Lineage, held together by Grace Slick. But Starship had arrived at that milestone by abandoning everything that once made them worth listening to. Under the leadership of co-founder Paul Kontner, Jefferson Airplane had been a group unafraid to tackle political messaging. When Kontner departed in 1984, it was because he felt the group was becoming too slick. We Built This City topped a 2011 Rolling Stone Readers poll of worst songs of the 1980s by a wide margin, and the magazine's Blender and GQ both called it the worst song of all time. The winning margin was so large that the magazine reported it could be the biggest blowout victory in the history of the Rolling Stone Readers poll. Even Grace Slick, who shared lead vocals on the track with Mickey Thomas, eventually agreed. Slick said decades later that We Built This City is the worst song ever. The band that once defined the counterculture had become its punchline.
You built this city on rock and built this city.
Number 8. Vanilla Ice.
Melody, anything less than the best is a felony. Love it or leave it, you better gain weight. You better hit bullseye, the kid don't.
Ice Ice Baby was the first hip-hop single to top the US Billboard Hot 100, reaching number 1 on November 3, 1990. To the Extreme would go on to spend 16 consecutive weeks at number 1 on the Billboard 200, and it would sell 7 million copies in the US. For a brief dazzling moment in 1990, Vanilla Ice was the most commercially dominant new voice in American music. The foundation, however, was already cracking. SBK had put out a press release with a string of fabricated details about Ice's biography, including the claim that he'd gone to high school with 2 Live Crew's Luther Campbell. The Dallas Morning News published an article about Vanilla Ice's real local roots and exposed those PR lies. Then came the bass line. The song's hook samples the bass line of the 1981 song Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie. In a 1990 interview, Van Winkle claimed the 2 melodies were slightly different because he had added an additional note. The explanation collapsed under scrutiny, and so did the career. Over the next few years, there was a backlash against pop rappers whose biographies didn't match their rhymes. Vanilla Ice and MC Hammer fell fast.
Jumped in my car, slammed on the gas. Bubba, the avenue's packed.
Number 7. New Kids on the Block. In 1979, the Sugar Hill Gang, a trio of New Jersey kids assembled by indie label boss Sylvia Robinson, made rappers delight. And by the late 1980s, the pop industry had perfected a different kind of assembly line entirely. Between 1988 and 1991, Donnie Wahlberg, Joey McIntyre, Jordan Knight, Jonathan Knight, and Danny Wood became the most marketed teen act since the Monkees, commanding sold-out arenas and multi-platinum albums on the strength of coordinated choreography, color-coordinated outfits, and a sound engineered to make 12-year-olds scream. Their breakthrough second album, Hangin' Tough, released in August 1988, climbed all the way to #1 on the Billboard 200 in September 1989, and the group amassed the kind of merchandise empire normally reserved for film franchises. But the architecture of the phenomenon was always more about image than music. The fingerless gloves, the high-top sneakers, the matching stage costumes, they aged almost the instant the decade turned. By the mid-1990s, the group had quietly gone on hiatus, and solo careers that followed failed to find meaningful traction. Their 2008 reunion generated modest nostalgia. But the legacy of New Kids on the Block is now more Halloween costume than musical touchstone. Number 6. Warrant. The president of Columbia Records, Don Ienner, wanted a rock anthem, so he called frontman Jani Lane, who wrote the song in 15 minutes. Warrant had actually finished its second album without it, but then Sony label executives said the album needed a big single akin to Aerosmith's Love in an Elevator. Incensed, Lane wrote Cherry Pie in 15 minutes and crammed it full of moronic sex references as a direct response to the execs. There was only one problem. They loved it. The label decided to push Warrant as the Cherry Pie Band. What was meant as a joke became Lane's legacy. The song became a top 10 hit on the US Billboard Hot 100, peaking at #10 in November 1990. But when grunge arrived a year later, Warrant became the clearest possible symbol of everything the new decade rejected. Cherry Pie came out in September of 1990, and Nirvana's Nevermind came out in September of 1991. Warrant never stood a chance. On August 11, 2011, Jani Lane was found dead at a Comfort Inn in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles. An investigation into the 47-year-old singer's death determined acute alcohol poisoning, with prescription medication also in his system. A complicated story and a genuinely sad ending. Before we continue, which of these bands did you actually love back in the day, even if you might not admit it now? Were you spinning Cherry Pie in 1990, or were you already ahead of the curve? Drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Number 5. Wham! Before the leather jackets, the introspective lyrics, and the global critical acclaim that would eventually come, there were matching neon shorts, shuttle-run music videos, and a duo so relentlessly carefree that even their own frontman eventually walked away from the act entirely. Wake Me Up Before You Go reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in November 1984. Careless Whisper followed it to the top in February 1985, when George Michael was just 21 years old. But Michael himself dissolved Wham! In 1986, telling interviewers that the act was too lightweight for the artist he intended to become. His solo debut, Faith, in 1987 went on to sell over 25 million copies worldwide, producing 4 #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100 and winning the Grammy Award for Album of the Year. The contrast between the two chapters of his career is almost impossible to overstate. Wham! Is now remembered as a glossy artifact of 1980s excess, all shimmer and pastel, while the artist at its center grew into something far more lasting. The sunny innocence of those early years has not aged gracefully. The music that followed it absolutely has.
I'm never gonna dance again. Guilty feet have got no rhythm.
Number 4. Hootie and the Blowfish.
You'll say, I just wanna love you, but you wanna wear my...
22 times platinum, Cracked Rearview, released on July 5, 1994, became one of the best-selling debut albums in American music history, eventually moving over 21 million copies in the United States alone. Darius Rucker's warm baritone and the band's unpretentious, radio-friendly sound made Hold My Hand and Let Her Cry genuine cultural fixtures for the better part of 2 years. For a moment, Hootie and the Blowfish felt like they might be around forever. The problem was the ceiling. Fairweather Johnson, released in April of 1996, debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 but sold a fraction of what its predecessor had. and the drop-off was visible almost immediately. By the late 1990s, Hootie and the Blowfish had essentially disappeared from mainstream conversation. Rucker eventually rebuilt his career as a successful country solo artist, charting multiple #1 singles on the country charts between 2008 and 2011. But Hootie and the Blowfish as a cultural force faded with a speed that surprised even their most loyal fans.
Sun comes up tomorrow, let her be.
Number 3. Poison.
Close together, we feel miles apart inside.
By 1988, the Sunset Strip had produced its share of glam metal excess, but few bands wore it as literally as Poison did. Bret Michaels, C.C. DeVille, Bobby Dalle, and Ricky Rocket built a visual identity of teased hair, leopard print, and stage makeup that was impossible to ignore. Every Rose Has Its Thorn hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on December 24, 1988. Nothing But a Good Time reached #6 earlier that same year. For 2 full years, Poison were one of the biggest acts in American rock. Then Nirvana released Nevermind in September of 1991, and the cultural ground shifted with a speed the glam acts never recovered from. Kurt Cobain publicly cited bands like Poison as precisely what Nirvana had been formed in opposition to. The teased hair and stage makeup that once sold out arenas became, almost overnight, the textbook definition of 1980s artifice. The band continues to tour to this day, drawing loyal crowds, but the critical rehabilitation that has gradually revisited some of their contemporaries has largely skipped over them. They remain a nostalgia act rather than a legacy one, which is a distinction the music world notices even when it doesn't say so out loud. Number 2. The Spin Doctors. Two Princes peaked at #7 on the Billboard Hot 100 on April 10, 1993, and for the better part of 2 years, it felt like it was playing everywhere. Pocket Full of Kryptonite, the band's debut album, sold over 5 million copies in the United States, positioning the Spin Doctors as one of the decade's genuine surprise success stories. The loose, jam-influenced grooves of Chris Barron, Eric Schenkman, Mark White, and Aaron Cummins had found an audience that nobody, including the band, had quite anticipated. But the formula that made the album work turned out to be nearly impossible to replicate. Turn It Upside Down, released in June of 1994, stalled critically and commercially within months of its release. Epic Records dropped the band shortly after, and the mainstream moment closed as quickly as it had opened. Two Princes is still licensed regularly for film and television placements, which keeps the name technically alive. But the Spin Doctors as a cultural force faded within 2 years of their peak. They became the quintessential example of a band whose moment passed with almost no warning, leaving a legacy built almost entirely on a single irresistible hook.
Kryptonite, got a pocket full of kryptonite.
Number 1. Right Said Fred.
Too sexy for my car, too sexy for my car, too sexy.
Number 2 in the United Kingdom, held off the top spot for 6 weeks by Bryan Adams. Everything I Do It For You. Number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 3 weeks in February 1992. Released in July 1991, I'm Too Sexy by Right Said Fred. At the time, the trio of brothers Richard and Fred Fairbrass plus guitarist Rob Manzoli was a genuine global phenomenon built on a comic premise, a minimalist groove, and a hook that lodged itself in the brain whether you invited it or not. The sheer audacity of two bald, muscular men posing as supermodels, delivered completely straight-faced, made it one of the most unlikely chart toppers of the decade. The song crossed back into public consciousness in 2017, when Taylor Swift interpolated it for Look What You Made Me Do, introducing the hook to a generation that had no prior context for it. But that interpolation functioned more to remind listeners of a novelty act than to rehabilitate one. Right Said. Fred released follow-up albums that attracted little notice outside the United Kingdom, and I'm Too Sexy remains their only meaningful entry in the cultural record. It is a joyful footnote, which is perhaps the most comfortable way for a list like this one to end. Not every act that fades does so in disgrace. Sometimes they simply run out of curtain.
Just kiss, hear the young words and